What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Sean Blair, and we speak a lot about Lego serious play and what it means to facilitate. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Hi, Sean. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're already almost started before even hitting the record button. So
I know.
I'm very excited to just explore the topic of facilitation with you and hopefully also hear a little bit about Lego serious play.
Sure.
And before we're getting there, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Probably about 15 years ago. I set up probably longer than that, actually. I set up my facilitation company about 15 years ago. So let's call that the time at which I started calling myself a facilitator.
Yeah. How did you call yourself before?
I was more of a sort of innovation consultant, I suppose. I mean, my way into facilitation was through helping large groups innovate. And I kind of discovered to do that, you do it often through things called workshops. And probably in my 30s, I discovered that I quite like workshops and I quite liked facilitating workshops. So I sort of discovered these things called workshops and that I quite liked being the bossy person in charge. I think my practice has probably changed a bit in the last 20 years. But yeah, so probably in my mid-30s.
And what has changed from bossy to however you would call your facilitation style today?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing to sort of question is, was I actually bossy? I think it's true to say that in the early days, I quite enjoyed the experience of sort of being center stage. And one thing, therefore, I know for sure has changed. My role as a facilitator today sometimes is to be center stage and directive, and sometimes to disappear and be invisible. So I'm much clearer in my practice now than I was in my mid-30s, that it's not about the sort of the person at the front of the room. There's this wonderful thing you probably encountered. Is it called facilitation from the back of the room? So that sort of awareness, I think, of presence is definitely one thing that has changed. I'm now in my mid-50s, and I'm sure that that's the case for most people. You know, as we sort of age, we become more self-aware.
And maybe also more intentional. I wonder to what extent it's also about control, that when we're starting off as facilitators, we might tend to be bossy because we prepared the session, we might be insecure. So it's easier to hold the process tight and to be bossy because it gives us the illusion of controlling the room.
The word that you used that triggered, resonated for me was insecurity. I think for sure, when I was new to it, I masked my insecurity with a variety of things, as we all do. I think as you spend 15, 20 years doing something, you learn more about how to do it and your insecurities diminish, especially if you consistently find that you get good results and good feedback. But it's a really interesting one that I encounter when I'm running trainings, when I'm training other people to be facilitators. That sort of sense to what I call facilitator presence. Some people have a very big presence and don't know how to dial it back. Other people have a very small presence and are not confident to turn it up. And I think successful facilitation is having an appropriate level of presence. If it's 500 people in a room after a tea break, maybe it's a good idea to have a big presence so that we can begin. If a group is in the middle of a really rich conversation and they're achieving the thing they want to achieve and the facilitator can add nothing, then disappear in a puff of blue smoke and just don't even be there. because there's no point being there. Well, you'd still be in the room, but just let them get on with it because they're doing the work.
Yeah. How do you train that?
Well, what we do is after we have experienced people facilitating, so our training is practice-based. We believe that you learn to facilitate by facilitating, not by watching somebody else facilitate. And after each person has practiced, we do some feedback. And our way of doing feedback is we ask the person who has just facilitated to give themselves some feedback. And that enables me to assess whether people are very good at rewarding themselves for the things that they do well or very critical. Generally, there's one of three positions you can be in. People are fantastic and say, oh, I did this well, that well, the other well. Or people are, oh, I did this wrong, and this wrong. Or a balance of the two. So I think that's the first thing we do. And then we get the group to give feedback, and then I, as the trainer, might make some learning points. And we make it explicit that we do the feedback in that way because we're trying to build self-awareness. We're trying to help people understand the impact of what they do. So I don't know that you can teach it, but I think you can offer some methods, some processes, some approaches to help people learn about the impacts that they have, how they perceive themselves, whether they're biased towards positive or negative, and to keep inquiring.
I was surprised that you said that you learn facilitating by facilitating and not by watching others facilitating. And I wonder whether I agree, because I think experiencing someone facilitating, so not watching it, but participating. And I wonder whether those in the groups that you just referred to, who give feedback to the facilitator, whether they don't learn as much from experiencing the facilitation of someone else and sharing the feedback, whether they don't learn maybe even more about their own facilitation.
Yeah, I agree. So I said you learn to facilitate by facilitating, not by watching others. I think, of course, you learn by watching others, but you learn best by doing.
Yes.
And we speak as people who are facilitators, and therefore we can observe somebody else using a new facilitation technique, and we can probably fairly quickly add that technique to our inventory. If people are new to the practice and their confidence is lower, they can watch, expert facilitators facilitating, and that may not help them with their confidence. What will help them with their confidence is seeing that they can lead a group to an outcome using the skills that they're learning. So, of course, you're right. We can learn by observing others. And I think my turn of phrase was particularly tied to the teaching that I do, which is teaching Lego Serious Play facilitation, which is a very sort of hands-on kind of a process. And I know that when I went on my training course, my teacher was the master, and mostly he facilitated for 4 days. And even though I was a confident, experienced facilitator, I left that training feeling very insecure and unconfident about my first assignments because I'd never done it.
And I think that's the magic virtuous circle, that confidence grows with competence.
Yeah.
And with competence grows the confidence. That in order to be confident, you need to practice and get the positive feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or even practice and make mistakes.
Yes.
Mistakes are wonderful teachers, and we welcome mistakes in our training. We make it, we have a safe space, and we always begin our training by saying we'll learn more from the things that don't go right than the things that do. So, yeah. Learning from successes, yes, and also learning from mistakes.
Yes, and providing the space where we dare to make mistakes to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does it take to create the space to make mistakes, or to encourage or even invite mistakes? Because it basically means encouraging to take risks. And I can imagine that especially in a training situation where at the end you want to leave with your certificate and where you know that you'll be judged, literally.
That's a really good question. It's a lovely question. What does it take to create a safe space within which mistakes can occur. I mean, one of the other things that I talk about is authenticity. So I think one thing that it takes as a trainer is to be authentic. I often, if ever I talk about this, I sometimes relate to a yoga class I used to go to. And there were two teachers that I went to. And the first teacher was a lovely lady, probably in her 40s or 50s. She spoke with a northern accent and she was herself and she was awesome. And there was another younger lady. She was American, I think. And she had this sort of fake yoga voice, this new age. That's not how she spoke. If you spoke to her in the tea break, she didn't have that voice. And I found it so off-putting that eventually I couldn't go to her class anymore because it was just like, no, be you, be you. So I think if people experience a trainer who is authentic, that really helps. I think if people experience the trainer making a mistake and having no fear or insecurity about owning that. And then I think probably more importantly than both of those is for people to experience after the first practice cycle that the way of getting feedback, the way of learning from mistakes is a rewarding process, not a punishing process. If people feel rewarded and acknowledged and thanked for those, then it makes it safe for everyone else to do that. So I think that those are some of the things that we use.
Yeah. A reflection about the authenticity. I think authenticity also comes with confidence. So
Agreed.
To know that it's okay, you have permission to own it and to be yourself. And I remember at the beginning of my podcast, and I think I still have it to some extent, my podcast voice. And then is it really inauthentic or is it just an alter ego thing that in certain situations we behave differently, just like we behave differently when we meet different people?
Well, let me ask you, was your podcast voice the authentic you?
I would think so. But there's, it reminds me of, there's this book called Alter Ego. And they refer, I don't remember who wrote it, refers to Martin Luther King, who didn't have sight problems, but before giving a speech would put on some glasses because this would put him into the mindset of giving a speech. And for me, it was the microphone. I have the microphone, and this puts me into the mindset or the situation of hosting a podcast. And I think the switch of voice might be similar. It's not inauthentic. But I wouldn't try. No, I'm thinking out loud.
Sure.
It's very authentic. I guess what you're referring to with the yoga voice is the copying the voice of someone else or copying the style of someone else.
Yes. Or having an idea of a style. It might not be a copy, but it might be a representation of how somebody thinks yoga should sound. And I don't think yoga should sound any particular way. It should sound like the person talking, whether they're, talking with a northern working class accent or they're from Jamaica or it doesn't matter. Just speak with your own voice.
Yeah. And the same applies to facilitation, right?
I think so. I mean, we human beings can spot a fake and a phony a mile off. And if a facilitator is asking a group to do a thing or a set of things, and they think that the facilitator is, I'll use the word phony again, a fake, I don't think that's going to work as well as somebody who's standing there in all of their raw authenticity and being a human.
It gives permission to the group to also be human.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's a pure mirroring effect that is also so deeply rooted in our humanness.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, have you come across self-determination theory?
No.
Autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Relatedness, what is one of the three conditions of self-determination theory? And we relate to people who are authentic, I think. So one of the things that I often do in a face-to-face setting, if we, a group of 50 or 60 or 100 people, is I stand by the door, and as people come in, I just sort of say, hi, welcome. You grab a tea or coffee over there, put your coat over there, find a table. So I meet them as me, and therefore I create relatedness even before the first minute of the workshop. And then when I ding my bell or stand on stage or grab the attention of the room, they're like, oh, that's that guy who was nice to me when I arrived. So even before a workshop begins, you can create a sense of relatedness, which I think really helps.
And I think there are two things to what you just said. One is the warm welcome, seeing each participant and therefore allowing them a role and a place in the workshop.
Yep.
So immediately they feel more comfortable. Greeting them also shows that you're in service of the group. So on onsite, I used to do the same. I always had a bowl with M&Ms, and I would offer them some M&Ms in the beginning. And I think I did this out of instinct, but now thinking back of it, it's actually, the act of being in service. Mm. And what you said about the authenticity, I think we have an instinct that warns us from danger. And if someone is not authentic, we have a suspicion that there might be some danger around animal instinct. And therefore, we cannot lean in. We cannot be fully ourselves and open up and be vulnerable and creative and everything that we actually want participants to be.
Do you know, it reminds me of a story, a very brief story. I was running a 2-day workshop for a group of about, 20 or 30 people. And I had a novice trainee facilitator there to observe. So learning from observation. And we did a little bit of a sort of a learning review at the end of day one. And she mentioned the highlight for her was a moment that happened very early in the day. I can't remember exactly what was happening, but let's say within the first 10 or 15 minutes of the workshop, I was getting some views from the room. And one guy sort of said, I was asking people to say, what their name was and then what their point was. And this guy, old guy, white hair, stood up and he said, my name's Bob. And I immediately responded. I said, my son's called Bob. And he said, Daddy. And the whole room fell about laughing. It was just brilliant. Just this sort of totally off piece, totally in the moment. And we had such a laugh. And she sort of said, I felt like at that moment, you really won the group because they saw you as being an authentic. I mean, she probably didn't use exactly these words, but this was the gist of what she was saying. They just saw you as an authentic human. And, it was just such a wonderful moment. An old guy, much older than me. Hey, I'm Bob. Hey, Bob. My son's called Bob. Daddy. And we just all had a bit of a giggle. It was such a lovely moment.
Yeah. That's this connectedness that you cannot fake.
Exactly.
It's nothing that you can plan ahead or.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Very interesting. How do you make workshops fail? What makes a workshop fail?
Those are two very different questions. I don't think I do make workshops fail. In fact, I try my hardest to make them not fail. But if we look at the second question, how do workshops fail? The first thing that comes into my mind is through poor planning. I think not understanding, for instance, a failure, which I think failure is probably too strong a word, a wobbly moment that I have encountered has been occasionally, if I haven't understood the politics and culture of the people that I'm about to work with, if a group is in conflict or there's some political issues or there's people that don't like each other, or if you turn up, with a well-prepared plan and a nice smile and you don't understand the culture and the politics, that could be a problem. So I think what makes a workshop fail, for me, probably poor planning, wrong objectives, wrong people, wrong process, wrong methods, wrong tools, all of which, come down to the planning process.
As a facilitator, do you ever find yourself stuck in a rut using the same activities over and over again? Or do you find yourself without a plan B, even though we know that things never go according to plan? That's why we made facilitator cards. I'm Meg Bolger. I'm a professional facilitation geek and the CEO of Facilitator Cards. Facilitator cards are the helpful nudge you need to get more creative in your workshops. They're a pocket-sized tool that you can use offline to create agendas and backup plans for your virtual and in-person facilitations. And for Workshops Work listeners, you can get a free set of wet erase markers to use with your facilitator cards by using the code WorkshopsWork at facilitator.cards. That's facilitator.cards and enter WorkshopsWork at checkout.
So how would you start then a session where you know that there are conflicts and politics in the room waiting for you?
I would say to the client in the planning phase, are there any politics or cultural issues I need to be aware of?
And then? So, okay, he briefs you. Okay, so it's a conflictual team. There's Susan and Peter. They don't talk to each other. And there is Lucy, who wanted to be the team leader, but she didn't get the position.
Yeah. So great. First of all, I sort of know. I know, the position of the people. The sort of scenario you describe is kind of really interesting because one would try to design a process. Let me give an example. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if Pete and Jane hated each other and it was some kind of, let's call it that the workshop had some kind of team building component. I have done this, pre-prepare some questions where I say to Peter, if I was doing it in Lego, for instance, I might say, Peter, build a model to show a leadership strength that you admire in Jane. Jane, build a model to show a leadership strength that you admire in Peter. So I put the people who don't get on and I ask them to give some positive feedback to each other. And that can be amazing. Mm. Because people are, even people who are not in conflict or dislike each other, people being kind about each other at work, I don't think happens as often as it could. So even if you take two people who are sort of not in conflict, to get somebody to give some positive, kind feedback to another, I've seen that done with surprise and emotion in all sorts of positive ways. So maybe that tells us that there's a rich space for more kindness and more positive feedback at work. Yeah.
And especially detailed positive feedback. It seems to me almost as if when we give negative feedback, we go very much into detail and explain exactly what we disliked and disapproved. And when something went well, we say, well done, good job, full stop, without really explaining what we mean by that compliment, which kind of devalues it. And then we forget easier about the positive one. And the negative one sticks to our mind because it's so much richer.
Yeah, I get you. And I think I have experienced that. I've also experienced positive. Well, I would make the difference between negative feedback and constructive feedback. Mm-hmm. I think that's a small linguistic difference, but I think it's an important one. But let's take the idea of positive feedback. I've seen it done with real depth and richness, and not the good job, well done, but sort of really unpacking, why that person thinks it's a good job and what was well done about it. So I have experienced both. But I think what's becoming apparent to me in this conversation is, maybe we could put more care into facilitating processes where that richness and unpacking that richness is a part of the process.
Yeah, I think it would definitely add safety to the conversation and depth, because we tend to listen more to people or deeper to people we care for and respect. And we respect and care for people who appreciate us because we trust them.
I totally agree with the second 2 points. I think that it may not be safer for the person giving the feedback because it potentially requires a degree of vulnerability to identify, highlight, and articulate the beauties, the positives, the superpowers, the strengths of the person that you're describing. So potentially safer, potentially not safer for the person giving the feedback.
And you mentioned that in your example, how you would approach Peter and Jane's struggle, that you would ask them in the context of Lego Serious Play to build a model of great leadership strengths in the other person. What is the power or the benefit of using Lego for such an exercise as opposed to using words?
That's a really good question, and it's one that often comes up. I think that the objectification of particularly difficult or emotional issues through an object makes it much easier to talk about. Let me try to bring that to life for you. If we were facilitating a meeting where we were interested in understanding the negative behaviors in a team, if we said to the team, okay, team, we're going to spend the next half an hour and we're going to talk about the negative behaviors we've seen in this team in the last week. So I can see you grimace in that sort of scary scenario. And I agree. I think that would be a really super tough conversation that would put people on their edge, and some people wouldn't join in. So I would never do that. However, if you said to a group of people, as I have many, many times, build a model to show a negative behavior you've seen in this team in the last week, then in 2 minutes, people build models of somebody being superior, somebody not sharing resources, somebody staying in their own bubble. And that enables the conversation. We are talking about the behavior, not the person. So Lego Serious Play allows groups to explore difficult emotional issues by objectifying the issue into an object and taking it away from a person.
Because in a conversation, just to make sure that I understand, we would maybe out of the way we are speaking would always refer to the person and give an example. Okay, this person did that, this person did this. Whereas Lego, you have an avatar that represents a person.
You have an avatar that represents a behavior. Yeah. It doesn't represent a person.
Yeah. And a second question, is it also maybe due to the fact that actually you give participants time to actually map out their thoughts and feelings? Because it's tactile, so they cannot speak immediately. They first have to build it. And you call it model. What does it mean, build a model?
Build a Lego model, connect some bricks to create a representation.
Okay, so it's a representation which can be an entire scene, so it's not only one individual.
Probably wouldn't be. I mean, it would probably be a little model like this. I'm holding to the camera sort of a simple.
So it's a star.
Just a simple arrangement of Lego bricks.
Star with a flag in the middle.
So somebody could sort of say, a negative behavior I've seen in the team this week is somebody just going off in all different directions and not focusing on the thing we're supposed to be focusing on.
So would you, in your Lego set, would you have avatars then or no people?
Well, in Lego Serious Play, the little figures are called minifigures. Mm-hmm. And yes, we definitely have minifigures as bricks that are available. What's really interesting is one of the very first things we often do in a Lego Serious Play workshop is teach people to use the bricks as metaphors. And if we use a brick as a metaphor, then we don't need minifigures. So, we might play a game at the beginning of a workshop. Let's play a game called Single Brick Metaphor. Mm-hmm. If this pink brick was a metaphor for something, what could it be? So what could it be for you, Miriam, if this pink brick was a metaphor for something?
So it's a pink long brick, could be a metaphor for collaboration.
Could be, absolutely. Could be a pink brick of collaboration, or it could be lipstick, or it could be ice cream, or it could be love, or it could be sleeping soundly at night, or it could be COVID. The point is that we can make a brick mean anything we want to. And once people learn that skill, it frees them up from any insecurities about needing to be good at building Lego models. We don't need to be good at Lego to use Lego Serious Play. And we can tell very rich stories with very simple arrangements of bricks because we're making bricks mean things.
And as a side effect in the beginning, you are mapping out the words or the concepts that shall be central to the conversation. Because if you're giving a meaning to a brick, this means that, okay, this concept is important, that we need a representation for that.
And actually, the other interesting word that you've used there is the word meaning. I think it's funny, I've just been asked by a new client to run a workshop that probably includes a vision element. So vision in my lexicon is a picture of a desired future state. And I think one of the best tools that I've encountered for visioning is Lego Serious Play. This particular client is skeptical about Lego bricks, understandably. Many people are. And it's as yet unclear as to whether we'll use this method or not. If we are not able to use it for cultural, political, or whatever reasons, we'll have to go back to use some other tools, which might mean things like words. And what's brilliant about people telling stories of Lego models is they tell the story as to what it means to them. Whereas if we craft vision in words alone, a few words on a flip chart, the words might mean different things to different people. So when you hear people tell stories of a shared model, we're more interested in the meaning than the words. The meaning is more important than the words. And if the meaning is the same, a group have a shared understanding. If the meaning is different, a group may not have a shared understanding.
And especially when we are talking about vision, if there's no shared understanding, then you don't need a vision.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very...
run into a different direction.
Exactly.
Isn't there then also the risk that people would look at the model, give different meaning, and then everyone has the impression as if they were aligned, but in fact they are not? So what is it about a model that would be a good representation of a vision that really aligns everyone, as opposed to a bad one, air quotes?
I could show you a number of videos of 4 different people telling a story of a model in 4 different voices using 4 different sets of words, but the meaning is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I would suggest a group is aligned. And similarly, if you have a group, one person tells the story of a model and then somebody else follows and the meaning is different, that's when a group is not aligned. And if the objective is to create alignment, which it might not always be, but if that was the objective, then the alignment and the meaning is important.
So what is the most important step in order to create this alignment, especially when thinking of Lego? Is it then to really explain the meaning of the different blocks, or to...
Yeah. I mean, I think what we encourage people to do when they're telling stories of shared models is what we call tap and tell. So they physically tap a brick and tell what it means.
Mm-hmm.
I call it a lost wand. If somebody has a sort of a pointy stick and they're telling a story and they're kind of just waving around here and they're rambling, then we don't really know what the story of the model is. If somebody's super precise and sort of says, well, we're aiming to achieve this thing here, this green brick of growth, and we're going to deal with the grey thing of da-di-da, and the black thing means this, and the yellow one means... And then the person that follows does something similar, even if the words are slightly different. If the meaning is the same, it suggests alignment.
And it also reminds me of looking at abstract art. When someone points out what they see in that, you cannot unsee it anymore.
Yeah. Or you might be able to see 2 stories, the meaning to one person, and then you may have a different meaning. So you may be able to see both stories. And then, in the case of a facilitator, if we were using an abstract art rather than a Lego model, I think the job of the facilitator is to ask the group whether they have shared meaning or not. And if they do, great. If they don't, and the objective is to create shared meaning, then the facilitator might sort of say, well, do we mean the same thing? I mean, one thing that I often find myself is when somebody is unclear about what a brick means, I say to them, so does it mean this? Or does it mean that? Or can we be clear about what this means? Because at the moment it's not clear. And if somebody is not clear about what a thing means, then that lack of clarity might roll throughout the entire process. So therefore, one of the jobs of the facilitator is to facilitate clarity of meaning.
And it weaves so nicely into storytelling.
Absolutely.
Because if the meaning is not clear, then the story becomes blurry.
It does.
And then nobody can follow anymore. So it's an easy way also to point out the missing meaning or clarity without putting someone on the spot, because it's just filling in some color into the story.
Yeah.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.